Okay, thank you very much. So, I don't know about you, but I've been looking forward to and dreading this session for the last 3 days because I feel a huge responsibility in getting this conversation right. We have an unbelievable panel of people here today from all sorts of different stakeholders with different views, and I'm really hoping that they will be extremely disciplined in their 10 minutes, leave us 20 minutes for discussion, and then we're going to have a coffee break. But there is a slight revision to the program, so if I can tell you about this now, you might need to think about it. So we're going to come back after the coffee break for a Q&A session until about 11:45. But the first part of the Q&A session, we will invite through Skype Congresswoman Sheila Lee Jackson. And she wishes to talk about the Rodchenko Act in terms of the protection of whistleblowers and other powers in relation to anti-doping policy. And in order for us to facilitate a smooth way of asking her questions afterwards, I'm going to need you, during the coffee break, to see Jens, who's just walked out of the back, but he will be here at the front. If you've got a burning question for the Congresswoman, you need to get it to Jens in the break, and that way I'll be able to manage the discussion. So she'll, after the coffee break, she'll talk for 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then we'll get at least 3 or 4 questions in before we close the Skype. Okay, so you can see the order of the speakers here to my left, and we're going to start with Michael Ask. As you will all know, I'm sure, he's chair of iNADO, the former chief executive of Anti-Doping Denmark. He had a distinguished career in policing in Denmark. He was detective chief superintendent, but he also headed the National Center for Investigation. In addition to that, as if it wasn't enough, he holds a master's degree in public governance. So a man for all seasons. Mike.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that nice introduction. I think also I have another role this morning. I feel, at least from the talks in the bar yesterday, that I'm kind of the warm-up guy for some of these distinguished persons here, maybe especially Yuri. But you have to be patient a little bit before he comes and my colleague comes to the floor to take the word. So I will speak a little bit about NADA. And before that, I should probably mention that all the roles mentioned by Mike, my main role here is to talk as a chair of the Institute of National Anti-Doping Organizations, which we in daily life call iNADO. We are an organization that represents 67 national anti-doping organizations, and our aim is to build up the capacity amongst our members, but also at the same time to advocate for the interests of NADOs within the rather complex anti-doping world of different stakeholders and organizations. Our members are very different in size and capacity, like the boats you see on the screen behind me, but what they do have in common is a desire to float, sail, and steer in the right direction in the complex ocean of anti-doping activities. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk about WADA, a little bit what I think they have achieved within their 20 years of existence, but more importantly, what I think is important for the organization for the future. It's an organization that, in cooperation with all stakeholders, should try to get not only the different NADO boats in the ocean to sail in the right direction, but also the boats sailing under the flag of an international federation or a major event organizer. And since WADA, unfortunately, is not present here at Play the Game, at least not today, I have a golden opportunity, of course, to say whatever I want without being corrected or argued against. No, I'm of course just joking, because I think it would have been great to have WADA here, and I think it's a pity they are not here to engage in the discussion we will hopefully have after our presentations here. So WADA is turning 20 this year, and that is an age where you've grown up, you've gained some experience, you learned some lessons, but you still have a lot to learn. And in many aspects, I think this assessment fits well into where WADA is today. So trying to assess WADA, I will divide it into 2 areas, an operational part and a more political or governmental part. So let's start with the operational part. For too many years, the system to monitor and assess the compliance of an anti-doping organization has been too random and non-transparent. By the implementation of the international standard for code compliance by signatories, which is also in daily talk called ISCCS, very easy to remember, that's a huge step forward. It has been a huge step forward to create this system because it tries through questionnaire and follow-up corrective actions to align the performances by all anti-doping organizations, whether they are NADOs, national anti-doping organizations, or anti-doping organizations connected to the federations. Is the system perfect? By no means. In my opinion, the system focuses too much on whether or not an anti-doping organization lives up to all kinds of technical standards. Do we have a clicker here? It's this one, green one, yeah? If it works. Yeah, I'm pressing the green button. Oh, that one. Oh, yeah, there were 2 green buttons. Of course, I choose the wrong one, obviously. As you can see on the screen from the images coming up here, there are all kinds of technical standards and rules that an anti-doping organization, has to live up to. And even a well-resourced NADO, like my own, for instance, in Denmark, for us it's actually impossible at all times to live up to all these standards and regulations. Now, this is in many ways a natural development for an organization like WADA to become a paper tiger, because the main task for WADA is to regulate and control, and as new ways of cheating are discovered, the answer is to add more rules and regulations. But the paramount question is whether or not this has gotten a little out of hand. It's not unusual that the papers distributed up to the WADA Foundation Board and Executive Committee meetings consist of more than 1,000 pages. Actually, yesterday I received the papers for the upcoming EXCO and Foundation Board meetings. It was 1,499 pages. It is impossible for anyone to comprehend the consequences of all these proposals and suggestions within these papers. And while the anti-doping organizations, even in the developed part of the world, are struggling to try and live up to all these technical standards and documents, we are still experiencing big parts of the world where, in reality, only very little anti-doping work is taking place. Yesterday, we had a breakout session where Dr. Bill Kudihi, who is a member of the Sport Ireland Anti-Doping Commission, showed some figures. It was interesting to see the number of tests done by per capita in the different countries in the world. Number 1 on the list was Finland, 493 tests per 1 million inhabitants. And in the bottom of the list was Indonesia, 0.22 tests. I know these numbers cannot stand alone if we are talking about the efficiency of an anti-doping program, but still, I think it's worth giving a thought. So a lot of these things, very technical things, are very difficult to develop it's even difficult in the developed part of the world, but in the not so developed parts of the world it's even worse. This is a photo taken by my testing manager in Kenya, where he was doing a project together with our Norwegian colleagues, trying to help the Canadian anti-doping organization, doing some whereabouts controls. And you can imagine when you get out into a small village that the whereabouts system is not really fit for purpose for a lot of parts in the world. I have seen examples on whereabouts where it says you go to the village, call this and that, you go to the town square, you find the road that goes in the easterly direction, you walk down the road 300 meters, you find a house with a red door, and from there is further 3 houses or 3 doors down. It's just to say that a lot of the systems we have are looked through or developed through the lenses of the developed world, but the majority of problems lies in the third world, and it cannot necessarily be solved with sophisticated technical solutions. We need to enhance the level of the anti-doping work dramatically in these areas if we one day could have something that we truly can call a level playing field for all athletes. and we should concentrate on solving these matters first and foremost. WADA has also developed an investigation and intelligence department within the last couple of years who works with informants and whistleblowers and in cooperation with law enforcement when needed is pursuing the big-scale doping offenders who very often represent strong political or economical forces behind the athlete. And that is an important step forward as well, but this development has not been invented by WADA themselves. It's more a reaction to some of the revelations done by investigative journalists like Hajo, Seppelt sitting here at the panel as well, and it would have been great if WADA has been more proactive here. On the political and governmental part, I would make it very short here at the end of my presentation. Although small steps have been taken in the right direction, there's still a long way to go before we have a WADA with a governance structure that truly embraces the principles of the tripartition of power in a legislative, an executive, and a judiciary branch. Although the creation of an independent compliance review committee has been a good step forward, there are still too many unclear procedures and ambiguities in who and on what grounds decisions are being taken at WADA. The decisions taken in relation to the Russian doping scheme is a perfect example of that, and I'm sure we probably get back to that in the Q&A session. I would like to see a much more value-based and transparent organization in WADA that embraces its stakeholders, including the athletes more, and even try to expand the stakeholder group to other groups like sponsors and media. An organization that sets the compass for all boats in the anti-doping ocean and helps them float and sail in the right direction. The NADO community is responsible for approximately 80% of all anti-doping work that takes place in the world. And iNADO, representing 67 of these organizations, we are prepared to work closely with WADA in order to help raising the water level so we can get all boats to float. But it has to be a cooperation that goes both ways in a binding way. There is no alternative, especially if we want to avoid what this poor fellow is experiencing here, that the boat cannot sail anymore and they will sink. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. We'll move on to our second speaker, Becky Scott. She's the current chair of the Athlete Committee of WADA, a three-time Olympian, a gold medalist, and an IOC athlete rep and member. She's lived a sporting life of absolute distinction, so I'm really delighted to invite you to the podium and to listen to your talk on politics versus principles.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out first thing in the morning on this fourth and final day of a conference. I was an endurance athlete, and I can honestly say your stamina is impressive. My sport was cross-country skiing, which I once heard a comedian describe as something like alpine skiing with the fun taken out of it. But my entry into the world of anti-doping was kicked off with the very personal experience of constantly being pitted against known dopers and drug cheats from a variety of nations throughout the entirety of my career. Doping was, and very much still is, an open secret in the sport of cross-country skiing. When I finished third at the 2002 Olympic Games in a state just next door to here, it was to two Russian women who later on tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. The greatest shock of all to me was not that they had been using performance-enhancing drugs, but that they had been caught. My bronze medal was subsequently upgraded over a number of years to silver and then eventually to gold. Yes, I have had 3 medals for only doing one race. No, I did not get to keep them all. But I did end up with an Olympic gold medal at the end of it all. And even though the entire experience was entertaining to some degree, 3 Olympic medal ceremonies, at the end of the day, the experience was ultimately incredibly disheartening, because my idealistic beliefs and views of how anti-doping and tackling the problem of doping and cheating in sport should be addressed had met with the reality of how it was being addressed. And the two were obviously not the same. At the same time, though, that this was all happening, I was becoming aware of a new global agency that had been created to tackle the scourge of doping in sport and the very issues that I was living and experiencing as an athlete competing on the international stage. This agency was WADA, of course. And the more I learned about this new agency, the more hopeful and optimistic I became that the situation that I was living and the situation that many athletes were finding themselves in as clean athletes trying to compete and wishing and hoping for a level playing field was actually being addressed, and that sport could actually be redirected onto the right path by the right people. I joined WADA in 2005, and by 2014, I had become the chair of the athlete committee. And it was all going very nicely. And then the Russian doping crisis erupted. And the agency began navigating the biggest doping scandal and fraud of the century. The WADA Athlete Committee found itself in the very heart of a series of decisions being made that were ultimately and directly impacting athletes and the very foundation of sport. And we became increasingly vocal and increasingly demanding in an effort to encourage principled decision-making at each turn and every fork in the road. As it became increasingly evident that the decision-making was going to prioritize politics above all else, a divide opened up between the athlete community and the very system that was created to protect them. A strong sense of alienation and disillusionment permeated throughout the athlete community, and there has been and continues to be a tremendous loss of confidence and of trust. But we, as the athlete committee within the organization, have continued to work and continue to try and drive efforts to support and represent athletes in sport, on the belief that even when you know there's a problem, or when you know there's a problem, and you're not trying to confront it, or find solutions, or work to resolve it, you're part of the problem. When we look ahead to the future of WADA and the critically important task of restoring confidence and trust to the athlete community, we have to talk about change, and we have to talk about doing things differently than they have been done. We need to start with a return to balanced decision-making based on principles and integrity. Decisions that prioritize clean, fair sport and equality of opportunity for all athletes above all else. Just as importantly, we need to start talking about bringing athletes into the tent, giving them equal representation, a proper say, and equality of opportunity around the table, decision-making tables. Involving athletes as equal partners and the important stakeholders that they are can only be for the good and for the better of sport. Nobody cares more about sport than athletes. Nobody cares more about the future of sport than athletes. And nobody actually has more to lose than athletes when sport goes the way of becoming just another business without any integrity or it's lost sight of its principles. A change in leadership this coming year represents an incredible opportunity to restore confidence and trust within the athlete community. It is an opportunity to demonstrate that the rights of athletes are paramount and that the decisions being made are in their interests and for the greater good of preserving integrity and fairness and thus the spirit of sport. But it's not just up to leadership. All of us have a role, and all of us are accountable for shaping the way and the direction that sport will eventually go. We cannot afford to be complacent, and we cannot afford to lose sight of what sport can and should always represent. We must all hold leadership accountable and responsible for the actions and decisions that they take, and we must all continue to fight for and support the rights of athletes. The future of sport depends on it. Thank you very much.
It's amazing when some people talk quietly, everybody else listens really carefully. And I suspect your career, along with that soft delivery, had everybody's attention. I think I paraphrase Amelia Rorty, who said of Aristotle, he felt that ethics without politics was like a bike without wheels. It ain't going anywhere. And we know in this deeply contested arena, combining ethics with politics, not either or, but combining those two, is the challenge for high-level leaders in sport, that's for sure. If I can make a link to another philosopher, I found out in my little bit of research for the speakers that Travis Tygart did a BA in philosophy. I knew he was a good guy. But we all know him as a distinguished lawyer and chief exec of USADA. He had a very large role to play in some of the most important cases in anti-doping, not least of all Lance Armstrong and latterly Alberto Salazar. And in that last case, I should say I wrote a paper in 2014 with Silvia Camporese contrasting elite athletes experimenting with drugs with pharmaceutical clinical trial volunteers. And the level of control and safety and protection of health for pharma volunteers is so much superior to the doping athletes and their own naive experimentation. It's incredible. So I do hope that this issue of the hyper-medicalization of elite sport is something that will be addressed in this panel, but I know that Travis will do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike, for that overly generous and extremely kind introduction. It maybe goes to show they'll give a philosophy degree to anybody these days. No offense to any other philosophy degree holders out there. Obviously, it's a huge honor for me to be here, and thanks, Jens, for the opportunity to come and speak and congratulate you and everyone associated with Play the Game for really an incredible conference over the past few days. We heard from an Oscar-winning director, and certainly if there's an Oscar to be given out for the best sports conference of the year, Jens, I think you and Play the Game and all the folks that help organize this absolutely deserve to have that. And while there were a couple uncomfortable moments for those of you who were here listening to Brian Fogel and that panel, I think it's safe to say we did miss WADA senior executives, and from what I understand, it's the first year since 2000 they have not sent someone, and that's a shame. And I think, as Michael asked, demonstrated, or suggested, that's certainly one thing going forward. Having a conference like this that we heard from Carl Host on the first day that is geared towards democracy, transparency, the freedom of expression is exactly where all sports organizations, quite frankly, should be, but certainly the organizations that are here to enforce the rules in a fair and consistent manner across the globe. So hopefully that's one thing that can come out of this panel discussions today. I also want to thank and recognize two individuals who are sitting on the very back row who were instrumental, I think, in the founding of USADA from a governance and a leadership position, who really set the stage and the core for what hopefully has been some success at USADA, which is Terry Madden and Baron Pittenger. Baron Pittenger is the younger of the two, but he's 94 years old, and one of the original founders of the model of independence. And we're so fortunate to have that as our history at USADA. And quite frankly, we have seen from experience that is the only way to truly handle the policing aspect of sport. And we're fortunate at USADA to have truly independent board of directors that oversee the operations of the staff. And when I say independence, I know we can conflate, and there's been some good discussion about independence, integrity. Make no mistake, from our view, from what we've experienced, whether it's high-profile cases that you've heard, whether it's day-to-day interactions with our government to get the funding that we need, having individuals who have no interest in the outcome of our decisions when we enforce the rules is absolutely critical, I think, to our success in any governance success within the anti-doping space. And so that great exchange, I think, was it Monday morning, between some of the questions about independence. Certainly you can separate individual integrity from roles, but when it comes time to independence, I think you can't simultaneously serve effectively in a sport governing capacity as well as an enforcement of the rules. Because, look, simply put, if you're an IOC executive board member, You want all countries, whether it's Russia, whether it's the US, whether it's Kenya, you want them at the games because that's what the broadcasters have paid you billions of dollars for. That's what host cities have spent billions of dollars investing in. And of course you want them all there because you want to see the best competition you possibly can put on the field. The counter to that is when you're the governing body that has to, or the organization that has to enforce the rules fairly, and it may mean you have to suspend the United States from competing if we cheated the world as we saw in the Russia state system, or you have to suspend Russia. It's counter to your interest when you're wearing your IOC executive board hat. Even if you want to say you can do it because your integrity allows you to do it, at a minimum, I think we can all agree that the perception is that you can't do it. And this model, right, which is not much different than the policing model, is a perceptual deterrent model, which means we have to give confidence to those we're asking to abide by the rules, that the rules are being enforced fairly, objectively, with no interest in the outcome of the enforcement of those rules. And the moment that those that expect us to have their back, namely the athletes, coaches, doctors that we want to follow the rules, believe that an unfair decision is going to come out, rightly or wrongly, the perception is going to be bad and is going to cause them not to want to abide by the rules. And that's pretty basic science, social science research that I think is very acceptable. So WADA on the way forward, I would point us all to the Copenhagen Declaration. And if you haven't seen it, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to find it. It's out there on the website. We can get you copies of it. 37 national anti-doping organizations have now signed off on the Copenhagen Declaration. Point one is we all believe in a strong and independent world anti-doping agency. A strong global regulator must exist. In paragraph 2, you'll see we also agree that it should be independent of sports organizations. And you'll see in 2A that the definition of independence is you can't simultaneously sit on a sports organization and on the enforcement body that is going to be making decisions about the very same sports organization or its athletes that you are making decisions about. The rule enforcer has to be sacrosanct. It can't have any actual or perceived interest in the outcome of the decisions when enforcing the rules. Pretty simple stuff, I think, for those of us who are in the fight for this. I will also note in the Copenhagen Declaration that there was adamant support for whistleblowers, not only specifically named Yuriy and Vitaly, who you've met this week, but also for other whistleblowers, and a specific call for both WADA and the IOC to take steps not only to compensate, but also protect those whistleblowers who have come forward and use their power that they have in leadership to ensure the protection of those individuals. Because we know from this conference, it's tough for whistleblowers to come forward. We heard about futility. We heard about fear of retaliation. We have to have mechanisms in place that minimize and mitigate those particular issues. On the good side, it's awesome. The WADA code now will have a specific provision that if you retaliate against whistleblowers, that can be an anti-doping rule offense. So that's an awesome development, but there's still more that we must do. I guess very quickly, one last point on the independence. WADA has agreed through its governance review process, 2 new independent members are going to be added. Let's hope sometime soon. It's been entirely too long. The Copenhagen Declaration was August of 2016. Here we are over 3 years later, but they have agreed 2 independent members, and it's not some different definition of independence. It's the definition of independence that you can't simultaneously sit in a sport chair and at WADA. So I think it's a recognition, if not an admission, that that is the ideal. Now it's just a question of how much control is sport going to continue to have on the executive function. Last piece, I guess, on Russia, and I'm obviously looking forward to further discussion. And let me just say right out of the gate that we have and have put immense confidence and hope in Yuri Ganas, who you're going to hear from in just a few minutes. We wouldn't have sent a letter to get his visa if we didn't. You look at some of our recent press releases in our UFC cases, and we give not only Yuri but his team at an operational level credit for some investigations that we have done. And we thank you, Yuri, for that. And I think the world is putting hope and confidence in you to right the wrongs that have been done and ensure clean sport actually matters in a huge, powerful country like Russia going forward. I have to acknowledge, and hopefully we can discuss this, what we worry about is the governance. You know, when we look at, and you were kind, I affectionately refer to Yuri as my fancy bear. When my fancy bear gave me his annual report at Lausanne in March, I was thrilled to see it, and it was fantastically done. But I was shocked to see the folks that sit on his supervisory board. There's an IOC member. There's a legal director from the sports minister's office. There's the general secretary of the Paralympic Committee, one of the most egregious organizations that cheated sport. And when I look at the disciplinary, Yuri, I see weightlifting vice president from the Russia Federation. And I just have to ask, how do we allow this to continue to happen? I think that independent model is not only best for WADA, but it's best for all NADOs. And certainly, we're not here saying we're perfect, but we have seen from experience having true independence of sport and government is the only way to truly be successful in anti-doping, if not in fact, certainly in perception to those that we need to abide by the rules. So with my time being done, thank you again and look forward to the conversation.
In a way, I wish that intervention had come 2 days ago, because that lack of clarity around impartiality, integrity, and independence, and the way those concepts are used interchangeably is entirely problematic. And I think you laid out that landscape really, really clearly. Thank you very much. Journalists often say their mantra is to speak truth to power, but I think not only journalists have that responsibility. So it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Yuri Ganas. The words poison chalice are used very often, but I think it would be a fair description of the offer that he received when he was invited to become Rusada's Director General. As we all know, he's been very outspoken, extremely recently outspoken. I'm delighted to see that he's still here with us, despite being outspoken. I'm delighted to welcome him to us, and I want to quote to you just a little line from his second letter. He says, "We were betrayed, we were deprived of the right to be on the side of truth." That's a hell of a phrase for a NADO head. In the wake of that, I'm delighted to welcome him to the podium.
Hello, my dear friends. First of all, I want to tell my respect to organizer for your invitation. As first, thank you for my friends for cooperation and supporting us, because it's not so easy to provide independence activity, especially so conservative country as Russia. And I want to tell my respect to USA Olympic and Paralympic Center. Yesterday I saw the wars which I bring to the Russian authority. Words of Bonnie Blair. Winning doesn't always mean being first. Winning means you are doing better than you ever done before. Nice words. And I essentially want to tell, it's very important because very often we forget about it. Yes, and how once, yeah. And first of all, about some story. This is story, you know it. And but I want to ask one question. Was it the beginning of the doping crisis? I mean, November 9 of 2015 and all other story? No, because this story started earlier. Because the base of this story started earlier. And today we are working, and from day to day, when I working from month to month, when I deeply and deeply inside of our deal and our mission, I understand. Ideal storm ahead. And this is not a question of this database, because it's a huge, this is tragic crisis. But I mean the regular work about the situation inside jurisdiction. This is a question, because it's not a question about the culture, zero tolerance to doping. It's understanding and positioning of our National Anti-Doping Agency. Because when I start work, I thought that the main task is to change the culture. But after some months, I understand we have to form, we have to develop, and we have to protect our independence. Because today, this is understanding, not clarified for all. And we're doing all our best, especially for it. And next point was, you remember, September 20, and it was, I remember this is a huge critical question which was before. And on the one hand, I told one who read and monitor situation and all media, I will translate the position. I try to clarify this position to all our officials and to all our society, sports society, because this is criticism was objective, because I told why you have reaction, not you, I mean, to our society, because Russian authority didn't realize all points, requirements of the roadmap. And in this case, I'll ask, why? What country will be our next step? Maybe it will be small country, and what we will do in this case? Maybe because the Russia is so huge country, and in this case, Russia had same possibility, yes? On the other hand, when I saw, especially when I estimate situation after some years, and when I saw who support this decision, and I remember Richard Pound, and I saw, okay, yes, and I saw the decision, and especially now, and I know situation, maybe will be some original, but I know about that battle which was inside Russia, because we have two huge power inside. One power was very conservative and told, no, we will keep close lab in any case. We will protect our position. And our power was to open the lab. And all of these forces was enough huge. And okay, and it was very nice that in any case, we opened the lab. Because for me, as for Director General of National Anti-Doping Agency, it's not only the case to close. This is a very long-term problem. First of all, it's an opportunity to develop our investigation. Because when we identify the athletes, our next step, we have to identify the coaches and all people who are around them. And this is very important because now we are making a picture, structure of all our sports and in all connection, athletes, coaches, and doctors. Because we really had a very spoiled jurisdiction and we extremely need to develop it. And I want to tell, it was a real critical step, but now I want to tell, it was the right step. It was the wise step. And what I want to tell, you know, I didn't have and don't have any connection to the sports organization before, but I work in the business, in the corporate governance. And what the most effective way? Differentiation approach. It not means that we have to break our principle and values, no. But we have to understand what our values and what our aim. In this case, we have to go ahead to keep our principles and values and to provide a differentiated approach, which I was. Because when we estimate what was first point, and it's easy, it's nice, it's additional picture to understand what was before, because when, for example, and for me, for example, I was really disturbed about this compliance, because I understand it's a real risky, because I'm not sure in it that all our authority realize all this two questions, as we saw. But in any question, what we have now, WADA and International Federation receive the points, yes, receive the information about the athletes, props, and working with these props. Now we understand what the base and I tell something about it. This is very interesting story too. And today picture more clarified, but situation is deeper. Now in Russia we have the tragedy. Yes, it's a real throw. Because I understand Russian sports community, current sports community, didn't involve in it. The shadow forces participate, and I ask, who is it? How are you possible to go through the control of investigation committee? And when we understand, is it in interest in investigation committee? You know, the investigation committee launched the criminal cases against the Grigory Rodchenko and other person. I want to tell you, because I graduated St. Petersburg Legal Prosecutors Institute. I didn't work in the prosecutor system, but the prosecutors and investigators touched me, and I prepared a dissertation, investigation of deliberate bankruptcy, during the 5 years. And I understand step was changing in the database, not in the interest investigation committee. Because in this case, attorney of the Grigory Rodchenko and all us have to very nice well known that this is evidence which based on the electronic database cancelled because they changed. And WADA confirmed these changes. This evidence now not possible to use in this criminal case. And in this case, I understand this is not interest in the investigation committee, but who is responsible for it? And I understand. Yes, investigation committee responsible too, because they control this database. And they control as a physical props too. But what is the forces which go through this as control? Through the control of investigation committee. This is first question. And what is the outlets for whom so huge efforts was made? And the reason of this, and what we will have in the future, this is a real, once again, this is most worst situation for all crisis period in Russia. And in this case, on the one hand, the old generation of the athletes, on the other hand, current and future generation of our athletes and all other sports specialists. And I want to tell you, we have in Russia clean athletes, we have in Russia sports specialists and coaches who are working on the base of the clean sports. And we have in Russia sports manager, leaders who are working inside, but they are not decision maker. This is the main problem. And about what I want to tell. First of all, we have to integrate all our efforts, because when I working inside of the Russia, I was very often that surprised. Because a very big criticism, and I real support. There are many questions in the working of WADA and all other organizations, yes, but it have to be inside question. And we have to work and develop our regulator, because maybe you know that during one of the legal conference in Russia 1 year ago, some of the members, some of the participants proposed not why we have only one regulator. Maybe we'll have 2, 3, okay, it's very nice. Anarchy. This is not our way. And in this case, we have all international anti-doping and sports community must work together. We have to decide this, because very often time I see when the criticism on WADA was on the one hand from the international anti-doping community, and on the other hand from the Russian authority. And it's very easy, you know, forms. Your enemy, if we are friends, and your enemy, my enemy. And I don't understand in this case, who is from what side, and who is our partners? And yes, we have a problem, and we have to develop this problem. We have to develop this together. Next question, and wow. Next question, and we don't push athletes away, but involve them in international community. Because in this case, I know the position officials which told to our clean athletes, please see, you don't need to ask to them. In this case, you have to be with us. And I want to propose to see on this question from the other side. And same situation with supporting of NADA, and same situation with all, because when I came to this jungle with closed doors, with enemies around, I tried to understand what approach I have to use. And I want to tell you, I use the book Soft Power of Joseph Nye. It's perfect work. And I use it especially to be, we have to be more attractive, but we have to base on this is our principle and our values. But we have increased our attractiveness for our, because when we see on our budget and all our situation, because today sports community involve more money. And you will see my presentation. I want to tell only one thing. Today in Russia, we have a Bible battle between heaven and hell. It's real true, without big words. It's real true. And because two sides, and we have to understand from what side we are on. And in this case, one of the huge problem, because when I told you that a sports community didn't involve in this problem, because we have the other shadow forces. And this is a problem, and we investigate the situation too. But in any case, I want to tell about the culture of the independent clean sports, athletes. But now I want to tell you, we have a very nice new generation of athletes. We have the independent view ahead. And they're increasing this and developing our sports environment. And for example, Maria Lasitskene go against and support my position. You know, I go strongly against our Russian Athletic Federation management. And she support too it. And once again, many words, but and same situation about the media. I want to tell about only 2 points. L'équipe and what reaction, because I see this is organized reaction. Rusada head Ganus blew up Russian athletics. Who blew up Russian athletics? Russian athletics down many years ago. I told that through the, equipe. And why does Ganus involve foreigner in Russian sports? And last article in New York Times. And I received the question. The head of Rusada said he was not afraid to return to Russia. It's a very interesting story because I received the question, what do you think about it when you told about the very authority athletes about the possible motivation of these exchanges inside the database? When I ask you about who is have to be, what is this person? And I propose, and I think it can be a very authority person who now in the power. And I received and media translated. And last question, after this media, after the article, Ganus took away the last hope. Took away the last hope of Russia. It's very interesting. And we had a very organized campaign, and we go against, and first of all, today you have to understand, Russia is independent anti-doping agency. This is our mission icebreaker. We go against, we are breaking the ice. This is system ice. And I want to tell you, we are under the fire from different sides. It's real true, and we're cleaning road for our athletes. And we will do it, and we go against without any, we now don't have any alternative. And we go against this system, and this is our icebreaker will go ahead. It's not dependent on the sanctions which will be ahead. But in any case, and maybe 1 minute, yeah, okay, yes. 10 seconds. 10 seconds, okay. And I want to, for example, to describe for you our battle inside. And when we discuss about Russian official state borders action as a real mute evidence of their position without any words. And for example, by rejecting Professor Richard McLaren reports results on the one hand, at the same time official section actually confirm correctness of these reports, among which already can be destruction our case against the past Rusada management on internal investigation. When I start work, we keep the old Rusada, we keep the same name, because I told, we changed this organization, we cleaned this organization. And I involved the independent organization Baker Tilly. This is British company, which base and which their competences on the forensic and anti-corruption analysis. And they brought for us report, corruption report. And I go and our investigation department of the Moscow Ministry of Internal Affairs broke this case, and we go against them again. And for example, other case, launching of the new independent Rusada, the supervisory mechanism of the prosecutor's office for our legal cooperation with Athletic Integrity Unit. And other case, when the Russian Olympic Committee tried to give us recommendation about the testing standard, it's impossible. And they tried to push on us. And same situation with 69 cases which were launched in one region, in one medical center. And okay, and I finished, and this is you will see all our principles. I want to tell about our figures, our points. Target testing, 65%, Rusada. I want to tell you, all athletes to whom we are going, and during the outside competition, yes, and in this case, I want to tell you, we know their name. We don't took as working previous Rusada. Previous Rusada points was not more than 10%. Yeah, and one part, well, and our whistleblowing policy, please, you can see, we organize work with whistleblowers. And 2017, 41 points, 2018, 78. And today, 3 months till the end, 87. And we provide all investigation. And we continue this work. And I want to tell you, my deputy, this is head of the whistleblower group inside the Council of Europe. It was our idea to organize regulation and to implement it in our very strong jurisdiction. But they will not have any alternatives. And only last thing. Yeah. Last, yes, this is our challenge to our jurisdiction. I very long create this picture because this is to our authority. Look at yourself in the mirror of human values. Decide which side you are on. It's time to step out the mirror land, doping crisis. And we are fighting. You can see the heaven and hell. And you can see from right corner, this is our...
Yuri, I'm going to be in hell
if you
don't stop talking.
Thank you very much for your... Yeah, you see, it's impossible working in here. Thank you. Sorry for my... Yeah, I took your time. Thank you very much.
No problem. Yuri was an engineer in his previous life, and the virtues of an engineer are honesty, accuracy, and rigor, but not timekeeping. However, I hope you think that the indulgence was worth the story, because that's an explosive story. Okay, our final speaker, Hajo Seppelt, is well known to you all. He's a fantastic journalist, a courageous journalist. He's got a distinguished career. He's multiple prize winning, and I'm not going to talk any further. Hajo, please come to the table.
So the TV guy now tries to speed up the process here because I have to go to the airport in a couple of minutes, and we can save some time. I make it short, and first of all, I totally understand the Rusada boss said he is trying to express as many as he can here, to need the floor, the podium, and to bring all what is necessary for him in the public domain. My last interview with the Rusada boss was in spring or summer 2014 with Nikita Kramayev, who is now not anymore among us. So this is now a totally different situation. And the next interview I did with the people from Russia was in 2016 with Vitaly Mutko, and then it was not allowed for me anymore to go to Russia because they denied the entrance to the country. And the next interview I did on Monday with Yuri Ganas. So the times they are changing, obviously. I think it's very interesting, the current situation with respect to Rusada. I'm very curious if the long-lasting stalemate between the whole world of sports and Russia will come to an end. Now we have another situation with the lab data in Russia and the obvious manipulation of the data, so I'm curious to understand or to see what will happen in the next couple of months. The whole Russia saga started for us in 2014, in spring 2014, thanks to the courageous, then investigative staff member from WADA, Jack Robertson, who led us to the Stepanovs. And so the whole story began with these two famous whistleblowers who helped to unveil the Russian doping system. And as Yuri Ganas pointed out, it was not only starting a couple of years ago, it is a long time system running in place in Russia for many, many years, and even going back to the Soviet Union times in the 80s and 70s. So we have to make that very clear. And it is, from my point of view, only comparable with the East German doping system which we had in Germany in the 70s and 80s, if you compare the extent and the scale, the dimension of the whole corruption system. For TV, it was a really, really big challenge for many years to uncover doping, but the task with respect to Russia was the biggest and most challenging one, because there have been so many challenges within the research investigation. As I said already, they declined my entrance to Russia. There have been many intimidations from Russian state-run media and trying to blame ARD German television. They told us that we are agents of CIA, or we are agents of the German government, and try to undermine the efforts of the Russian sports to work for clean sports, which was obviously not the case. It was exactly the opposite, which was the truth in the whole situation. And we had to work with many informants, and only because of the courageous whistleblowers, and it's not only one or two of them, but almost all of them has still to live in hiding. Only because of their courageous support it was possible for us to do that kind of stories. And it's not only the 2014 documentary, which we did in December 2014 with a big support of Vitaly and Yulia Stepanov. In the course of the last years, we did several documentaries on Russia. Usually we don't do that in that extent, but here, this was, as I said, historically one of the biggest doping scandals ever. And here, there's an additional point. Russia always denied the accusations, and they pretended they are now on the right track. And in fact, they weren't. So we could uncover in 2015, 2016, 2017, still 2018, again, shortcomings, failures, betrayal, cheating in Russian sports on a bigger, or maybe on a very, very large scale. So that was a reason we didn't stop. Some people told us we are Russophobe, which is completely, bullshit. We are investigating in many countries of the world, and it's not about Russia here, it's about the failure of an anti-doping system. And I would like to come to an end now by saying that I never expected in 2014 that with one research about one country, and at that time about one sport, it was athletics, there would be so much impact. Because what happened afterwards was not only the big discussion, it was much bigger. Just have in mind, anti-doping movements all over the world have been created. Athletes Germany, in my country, Athletes Canada have improved, have increased their efforts. Partnership for Clean Sport, Global Athlete, many discussions within the IOC, in WADA. It occurred many times that the WADA top officials themselves have not been really interested in to uncover the whole story and all the different details of that story. Even more, some of them tried to help to, let's say, to decrease the extent of the problem, or to to downplay it in an incredible way from my point of view. So there have been a lot of challenges. There have been a lot of moving things going forward in the right direction from my point of view. The task of television and journalism is not to change things. The only task we have is to make people aware about what happens in sports and to show what I always express it in this way, to show the other side of the medal. And I think we have here, in this particular case, we have contributed with our work, but now other people, I think, have to work and to continue with this. Thank you very much.
Well, can I offer my thanks to Hajo for very graciously cutting short his speech. Thank you very much, to allow some decent discussion time before coffee. Can I just invite you to put your hand up? But what I'm going to say now is if there's any speeches from the floor, I'm just going to cut them off. Right? It's a short, sharp question because time is limited. Thank you very much.
Hello, Andy Brown from the Sports Integrity Initiative. It's a question for Yuri, really. I wondered just how you'd respond to Travis's question about the conflicts of interest on the Rusada Board of Directors.
Sorry, please.
Travis mentioned a conflict of interest regarding the Rusada Board of Directors, regarding people from various bodies, such as the weightlifting.
You mean in our board of in our supervisory board?
Sorry, supervisory board.
Yeah, it's not a problem. Now we estimate in all research and situation and previous conflicts which they are solved because many times Russian Olympic Committee and some others authority try to propose a person from the Russian Olympic Committee on the chair and other. Today I want to tell the chair of the Russian Rusada supervisory board. This is Alexander Ivlev. He is management partner of the Ernst & Young, this independent person. And we inside of the board, we had 3 person, independent person. And on the first stage, we have a very hot discussion. But now, as I estimate, I worked before 10 years in the board of directors, and I had experience. And sometime I told them, before I sitting on your place, and I thinking about the interests, not in your whom you represent, in the interest of that organization in which you are sitting in the supervisory board, because this is corporate governance requirement. Now we, as I understand, solve this problem, but we will see what will be situation after investigation of the WADA and all others.
Travis.
Yeah, I would just to put a little bit finer point. I mean, the only one, it's tough for Yuri, right? Those are his bosses, so he can't really answer that question. What I would say is we had an opportunity when Rusada was non-compliant, and there were some requirements. They accept independent experts, which they did, and other requirements. And simply the requirement should have been, at that point, that we have truly independent people on their board. I didn't mention, but it's even worse than what I said, because if you know, the WADA Foundation Board has 2 representatives from the Council of Europe. And granted, no longer does the Foundation Board make decisions of compliance or non-compliance under the new ISCCS, the International Standard for Co-Compliant Signatories. However, those representatives certainly are involved with the public authorities meetings and are advocating their executive representatives at the Executive Committee from Europe. And one of the members of Rusada's Supervisory Board is an employee of the Council of Europe. Yeah. So again, when I mentioned the inability to have an interest in the outcome, the WADA governance is going to, assumably, over this data, make a decision on compliance or not. If it's as manipulated as bad as Yuri has obviously indicated to the press, then they should be declared non-compliant. But you have folks whose employees are overseeing Rusada. So how can the governor, the rule enforcer, possibly make a fair and objective decision on the actions of their own employee that's going to cause them, again, based on what we've heard about the manipulation, and I certainly don't know, to ultimately declare them compliant or not. It just reeks of a self-interest that has to be taken away from the system, in our opinion.
If you mean the Sergei Khrychikov, yes, who represent the Council of Europe, I want to tell you, once again, I repeat, on the first stage, we have a real battle inside. And I received the supporting as independent. And because I totally agree, the supervisory board, especially in the crisis period, have include independent person. And and especially on the first stage, the representative of Ministry of Sports or the Russian Olympic Committee tried to provide online. And in this situation, it was real helpful. And today I want to tell, I'm a member of two associations of independent directors. One of this association is international. And I want to tell, today we don't have any problems from that Sergei Khrychikov participated. I want to tell he balancing current board, because in this case he balancing that efforts which try to provide the Ministry of Sports and the Russian Olympic Committee through their representatives. Because this is a problem, because first of all they have to think about corporate governance, best practices and recommendation, but they sometimes forgot about it.
Okay, let's move to the second question, please.
Rob Keeler, Global Athlete. My question is directed to Michael and Travis, and I'm going to make one quick statement is the system is not working because athletes are held to a higher standard than stakeholders. An athlete tests positive, there's swift and immediate sanctions on them. We have stakeholders of Russia, no action. Romania, same things happened in terms of the NATO and the lab working together to hold results, no sanctioning. We hear the athlete's voice is the one that's going to change. The power of the athlete voice is going to change the sporting movement. But I'm going to throw it to you, Michael, and to you, Travis. Over the past 6 months, or maybe past year, I've noticed the voice of the NATOs decreasing and standing up for change decreasing, with the exception of a couple, and when I would put USA in there. Why do you think the NATOs have not taken a stronger stance vocally and publicly, and what are you going to do to overcome that?
Thank you
and
very
to make
much.
sure you do?
Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for that question. Obviously, I don't totally agree with you that we have been silent within the last 6 months. It is true, though, that if we swift away a little bit from the Russian crisis itself, it's its own agenda and an own item. It's no secret that we try right now from an outer side to approach WADA in a different way, because we have a new leadership coming up. We have some major problems which goes way beyond the Russian problem, which has to do with what I tried to explain in my presentation, the general lack of anti-doping work or proper anti-doping work in big parts of the country. And we can see a lot of possibilities to try and strengthen the cooperation in a much more efficient way between the NATOs, the stronger NATOs, and iNADO. So that's one point. That doesn't mean that we are silent and we would not criticize WADA for their actions. I think I was pretty clear in my presentation that a lot of things in WADA that is not appropriate, that is not living up to the standards that I mentioned in the tripartition of power, and also what Travis mentioned in the Copenhagen Declaration. I totally and iNADO totally adhere to those principles. When we have been out supporting Yuri, it's because for what we have heard, what we have learned from WADA, there is no, and it doesn't matter whether I trust Yuri or not. I mean, I'm an ex-law enforcement officer. I trust evidence. And I haven't seen any evidence when it comes to the new Resada that they are involved in the manipulation of the data. That means that it seems like it's higher up in the system that the problem lies. And I have been out saying that several times, and I would like to repeat it today. That is why we need, as long as we haven't seen any evidence against Rusada, we need, as iNADO, to support one of our member organizations that is, as you would say over here, caught between a rock and a hard place. I think Yuri made that very clear. We need to support them. If it turns out that it's part of a bigger conspiracy, it's another situation. But until I have seen that, I don't see any reason why we should not support them, because we are actually struggling for exactly the same principles that Travis was also mentioning. And we can always argue if we convey these messages in the right way or the wrong way, but definitely we're on
I'll
that
give
side.
Travis Travis, but I will ask Becky if she wants to contribute
very
as well.
briefly, listen, I think, and we've heard the discussion, Sunday's panel that you were on, Rob touched on it. You know, let's be candid, it's a power game, right? The athletes have very little power, and one sort of just point of contention that I think is worth mentioning in this athlete election or appointment debate. Let's not forget the IOC charter is there's 23 total athletes, and only 12 of those are elected. 11 of those are appointed. So it's not a group, as I think we've been led to understand, that's entirely elected either. So just a point that has to be part of the discussion. But listen, athletes have very little power in the equation. Similarly, NADOs have very little power in the equation. What are we trying to do to enhance, the influence and the advocacy? Certainly working with governments. You know, there was a White House meeting a year ago that came out with very similar principles around the Copenhagen Declaration about independence and openness and transparency and various aspects around it. But listen, I think as long as the power structure stays the same and those in it benefit from it, it's not going to change with the speed and the urgency that certainly us at USADA and athletes deserve to have. And so the question then becomes, who has the real power? And it's a group of folks within the IOC and its sponsors. And we have said for too long, and we have seen it after this most recent case dealing with coach and a doctor here, the sponsors have power. The broadcasters have power. They need to look at where their money is going and ensure that what they're paying for, what they're investing in, is fulfilling the promise of the investment, and ensure that they get what they pay for and that the public is not defrauded from what they expect. And listen, the Rodchenko Anti-Doping Fraud Act, we haven't talked about it, but I think it is entirely drafted and hopefully will get passage aimed at that issue. It attaches criminality to those who defraud sport through doping internationally where U.S. money is involved. Because governments of the world, and frankly, NADOs of the world, I think as well, see money being defrauded by doping as the same as any other embezzlement, bribery, the things we saw out of the FIFA case. And so let's hope that act gets passed, because that could be a significant advancement and an immediate advancement for the rights of clean athletes. But Rob, listen, the target on our back is as big as it's ever been, and that's not a fun position to be in, quite honestly. The holiday greeting card list is as short and small as it's ever been. A lot of NADOs don't want to be in that position, understandably. Nobody likes it. But outside of advocacy and using our voice, there's no power in the NADO community, just like there's very little, if any, in the athlete committee, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm very mindful of mission creep. It's very difficult to stay on track. We were on WADA, and it's very difficult to isolate what's next for WADA from the range of other stakeholders and issues that are going on. I'm mindful that time is nearly up, so I'm going to give Hajo the last word here. I'll hold over the question that's waiting into the next panel. Hajo.
I just want to refer on Rob Keeler's comments with respect to other issues apart from Russia. And I think that is necessary to say clearly here. We only talk about Russia, but we have not in mind, and we don't think, and we don't look into other cases all over the world. And all what we are doing is researching not only in Russia, but in other countries. And the failures and shortcomings in anti-doping worldwide are unbelievably high and big. And in the moment, it looks like for me that we are focusing just on a few countries for good reasons. Russia is a very strong example for failure. But on the other hand, there are so many where we don't look into it. And I think it's really time to do that. And if I see, for example, the Romanian example, the lab in Bucharest, the WADA investigative unit or intelligence unit did the work, but it has not been really taken very much attention on a global scale here. I don't see it, at least. And if you see how many countries have no anti-doping agencies, if you see how many labs currently have been under suspension or are currently under suspension, if you see all these shortcomings, then we have one problem. It's not only one country, it's not only one sport, it's much, much more. And I think the sports community worldwide cannot withstand the storm of the athletes anymore. And in 10 years' time from now, I'm pretty sure that we will have partially another world and much more power for and self-determination of athletes. And because my understanding and my feeling is that many federations, many international federations, don't want to see the problem. They are more interested not to talk about doping instead of fighting doping, because it is for them, if you don't talk about doping, but doping still takes place, it's the best business model. Because have in mind, to talk about, for example, an athlete with a high performance at a big competition. This is, so far doping is undetected, is fantastic for the event, because higher, more attractive means more money for the athlete, means more money for the manager, means more money for the sponsor because he can sell his products better, higher TV ratings, more money for the TV networks because they can sell their commercials better than before, better for the federations because they get more sponsors, better for the politics because they can better argue why they spend more money in sports. It's better for everybody. It's a win-win situation for sports unless doping gets detected. If it's the opposite, that would mean we talk about a journalist, for example, or a state prosecutor or an investigator comes around the corner and is exposing the doping, then it becomes a lose-lose situation, because then the athlete doesn't get the money anymore, he loses his title, the manager doesn't get his benefit with his percentage, the sponsor doesn't want to sponsor anymore, maybe they get less contracts, the TV ratings get reduced. The commercials are not, you cannot, as a TV company, you cannot sell the commercials to high prices. The sponsors leave. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody. So what is it about? For decades, it was not about only doping. The biggest problem in sports are not only the athletes, are the federations, are the people, the stakeholders who want to prevent that doping gets exposed. It's more a history about cover-up and not about doping. That is my take on that. And so we need independent people from the outside who fight against doping and not the sports authorities themselves.
That's a great place at which to stop part one of this debate. I apologize to those of you who've had your hand up for a while. We're going to take a short coffee break now, and then what we will do straight afterwards, during that coffee break, Jens will take questions for the Congresswoman, and we have a book here, you can write them down. But can I, before then, ask you to come back 10:45, absolutely on time in your seats, and to thank the panel for a great discussion. So to be clear, a new set of instructions, slightly different. 11:25, the Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson-Lee, will join us for her short speech and some responses from the panel. I'm shocked and amazed that there weren't a list of questions from the floor, but there weren't. However, our panelists are very keen to respond to the Congresswoman. So between now and 11:25, we will kick straight off with Q&A from the floor, and I believe the first speaker is ready at the back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nikki Dryden. So I'm not naive to know that this anti-doping fight requires people with criminal backgrounds and law enforcement backgrounds. But my question is about athletes that are spat out every side of this process, whether it's athletes unlike Beckie who have been not given the medals that they earned, athletes with minor doping violations spat out. So what kind of resources are given to athletes and set aside? Financial, legal, administrative support, so that we aren't just leaving, charred bodies along in this global fight against, what is like a very complicated thing, but at the end of the day, there's just carnage left behind.
Becky, I think that's for you to start with, really.
So I think I could start, but I think it's probably a question well answered by the NADO representatives as well, because they are really the arms and legs looking after athletes in the anti-doping process on the ground. My experience is that there isn't any resources available for athletes who have been spat out of the process. And I think an important clarification here is that it's not just clean athletes who need to be protected in the anti-doping system. It's athletes who have also been manipulated and abused as part of broader systems that see, success in winning medals at the Olympic Games as part of a geopolitical agenda. So there's tremendous carnage, you're right, and a lot of athletes who have been left behind, either in that they've been cheated out of their opportunity to rightfully achieve their career bests, or they have been used and abused by the system. And when we talk about athlete rights and we talk about the athlete voice, we need to include all athletes under that umbrella and ensure that that stops and that we're protecting everyone under that umbrella. But so to your question though about specifics around resources, I'm not aware of any that are looking after athletes who have been used by a system.
I'm going to go to Mike, if I may, next, and then to Travis and to Yuri, if he wishes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one thing that should be pointed out also is that an obligation for any anti-doping organization, whenever some investigation starts up, is that we need to be objective and we need to look at all aspects of the case. It's very common that we are referred to, especially by some media, like the doping hunters and stuff like that. And I think it's a simplification, because I think what we want to do is to enlighten all cases from all sides, and we need to protect, of course, also the athlete's right. And as we know from several interventions, the athletes are set to a very high standard, and in analytical, adverse analytical finding cases, they normally have the burden of proving that they're innocent, which means that it sets us as anti-doping organizations up to even higher standards, because we need to make sure that we have been out in all corners of this case to kind of enlighten the case as objective as possible.
And as iNADO head, do you think there's a consistent NADO approach to that?
To be honest, no. I think only recently, the last couple of years, we have started, at least in the European sphere, Council of Europe, there's some work on panels and independence of panels, and so obviously also something that WADA is involved in, and I think we should do more to. Still, there are too many places in the world where it's questionable whether the panels are independent, first of all, and if they have the capability and the qualifications to sit in a panel. Some panels are, in some countries you have panels for each sports discipline, so they might have a case every 5 years, and that doesn't make them very capable of making just decisions.
I would just echo, while Nikki, I heard your question the other day as well to the IF representatives about rehab particularly for those athletes that were found in the Austrian Germany investigation. What I would say is you're absolutely right that the system, and I think under the WADA code, the rules have failed to incorporate adequate rehabilitation for athletes, particularly those who are convicted of anti-doping rule violations. But let me be crystal clear, because it's not in the rules, that does not prevent organizations, NADO's included, I can only speak for us, from doing the right thing if you actually care about athletes. So there, in every case where we suspend an athlete or have a positive test, we seek to find if there are issues, whether it's mental health issues, whether there's addiction issues, to try to provide some, whether it's counseling or some referrals. Now, we don't run, outpatient clinics for, opioid addiction. Let me be crystal clear. But we're absolutely going to attempt to find resources for those athletes, and have done that in many cases. And I'll even, tell you, one of the athletes in the Austrian case reached out to us, and we had him come, the one Max, and came and spoke to our research symposium to a group of the top scientists around the world. And so while the IFs haven't reached out to him in that particular case, he has found consolation in some of the NADOs, and we're absolutely willing to do the right thing where we're in a position to be able to help individual cases. Because at the end of the day, we care about athletes, and we want athletes, whether they're convicted through the process, of course the rules are going to apply, but we can do what we can do to get them the assistance that they need so they can go on and have, not only rehabilitation, but also, productive lives after their sanction is over. I will say, in fairness, WADA code process, again, there's a new category for substances of abuse. And one of the ways an athlete, there's certain drugs that will apply to that, the ones you would most likely consider to be the recreational type drugs, they can now have a significant reduction, and we certainly support that. And there is a component of rehab that can even further reduce that. So hopefully, now that it's in the rules and those who are only going to operate by what the rules dictate, will now have a more consistent and an approach to doing what others, who are already, trying to provide those resources.
Can I follow up on that,
will do.
Travis? So in the same way that I followed up with Mike, the consistency question, because if we ask whose responsibility is it to deliver in post-care after ADRVs, it's great that you're prepared to say your own NADO is prepared to engage there, but you're a very well-resourced NADO. Most, perhaps all other NADOs are not as well-resourced. So whose responsibility ought it to be? NADOs? IFs?
I think anybody that cares and has interface with athletes ought to take responsibility for it. We certainly have taken that approach, and certainly it's a resource issue at some level, but the NOCs, the IFs, fortunately some private fundraisers have given to an organization called Fair Sport that is specifically founded to do just that. So I think the resources are there. It's just a matter of ensuring access to the resources and ensuring people that interface with athletes, whether it's through a legal process where they ultimately get a sanction and it might be adversarial, or they're just daily interacting with people on their national teams, ensure that athletes appreciate the resources that are there and tries to help them as best they can to navigate the different organizations and get them the help that they need.
I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, right? But I mean, is there an ethical or a legal duty of care of a national federation or a club or team to look after that positive athlete afterwards? That's going to strike a lot of people as an idea intention that a doping athlete has a right to post-violation care. But it's a really interesting one to explore. But I'll leave it up in the air. Yuri.
Yes, I want to support my colleagues. And my estimation as newcomer, I see the regulation of athletic movement have to be more stronger. Current situation is not enough. And we will see, for example, and I try to analyze, for example, when we provide the parallel with the testing pools, yes? For example, we have the national testing pool, and in this case, national organization responsible for them. When we discuss about the athletes of international level, and I mean international pool, this is regulation of international organization. And I mean, same system have to be in this sphere. But in any case, all athletes who in the jurisdiction, it will be the National Anti-Doping Agency and all system have to support it. But what I propose and what I saw, because we need to provide, we need to make more stronger this regulation and to implement, and this regulation have to be independent of the all regulators, because it's a very serious moment. This is first. And secondary, this regulation have to be implemented. Because, for example, when we try to estimate situation in Russia, our athletes, loyal athletes, have a very social lift. Why, for example, for us, difficult, I plan to organize athletes committee more than 1.5 years ago, but it's real very difficult because in Russia, social lifts for loyal athletes is too high. They can be in the parliament, they can be in some other sports organization. And this is, and in this case, I want to tell, We extremely need independent regulation, strong regulation for the athletes' movement, and this regulation have to be implemented in each sports jurisdiction. In this case, we will have the tools for protection first and for supporting. We need a systematic approach in this case.
Yeah, what compounds that difficulty is the strict liability rule. Because in the process of determining a positive test, you may or may not establish intentionality of the athlete. So it strikes me, we've got a couple of different cases going on here. If you say there is a country who is complicit in the doping of its athletes, then it's really clear that they should have a duty of care to those athletes. It's less clear where there's individualized doping, which is deliberate and strategic, such as we have with Mr. Armstrong. It's not at all clear to me that there's a duty of care after that. So I'll offer that to a thought to any of the panel who want it.
It's difficult to say where you draw the line. I think it's very from case to case based. You have to, I mean, the legal obligations are clear, I think, as I mentioned before, the objectivity, etc. The more moral part of it is, in my opinion, depending on the case to case basis. We have cases in my country where we have seen non-intentional doping cases where I think it's more obvious that we have an obligation to make sure that this athlete will have could go back. I mean, there will still be a sanction if it's an adverse analytical finding, but might be not the severe sanction, and the athlete still has to go back to his or her sport. And I think we have an obligation in cooperation with federations, clubs, to make sure that it is possible to get back to the sport after you have lived out your sanction. I think it's a principle of justice that applies to most countries in the world, and it also applies to sport. But obviously the other, let's say, type of cases, like if you take the extreme, like Lance Armstrong, Travis can answer for that, but I don't think there's a specific obligation there. On the other hand, there will, in the aftermath of those big cases, there will be people around the athlete who has been affected, maybe economically, maybe in other ways, psychological, etc. And I think we have a moral obligation to at least talk to these people and try to help them the best we can. Maybe advise them where to go.
Yeah, I would agree that it is on a case-by-case basis. But I think we all have a collective responsibility to ensure that no matter what the case is, the athlete involved has the same opportunity as any other athlete who would come before the Court of Arbitration to Sport to have quality legal representation. And this is where we're seeing a real gap in the system, in that some athletes who are incredibly well-resourced have incredibly strong legal representation, and they're able to fight their cases, at a different level than an athlete who isn't well-resourced and doesn't have access to that same legal representation. So, it doesn't matter maybe necessarily as much as if it was intentional or unintentional, but they should all have the same right to the access of quality legal representation when the case comes before the courts.
And Mike, I would just say, listen, and maybe I made the point already, but I don't think you need a legal duty to do the right thing by athletes, and we shouldn't find an excuse to not care for athletes just because there's no legal duty. Now, whether there is a legal duty and the ramifications around the world in the tort system of if you fail to do the legal duty, that's a separate question. But I think we ought to be encouraging everyone to do the right thing, whether there's a legal duty to do it or not.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Alex from the University of Colorado Boulder. This question's for Becky. So in the first half of this talk, we talked a lot about conflict of interest, and I get the importance of breaking that apart. But we also care about anti-doping because we care about athletes, and we care about athletes' voice. So I want to know what you think the ideal setup is, governance-wise, for athletes to have power in anti-doping institutions. And if we got that ideal setup, what kind of changes do you think we would see?
That's a great question, and one that we debate around the tables at the WADA Athlete Committee quite a bit. I think we're, at the moment we don't have any actual proper representation. I sit at the table as the chair of the standing committee, but I don't have a vote. So when the governance reforms were underway and the results came out, there was still no effort or to give a seat at the table for athletes. So I think we've undergone this process of looking at how we create an athlete committee that is really fully representative of all the athletes that are subject to the code, and we're having, in a way, it's an impossible standard to meet. Nevertheless, we're trying to come up with a model that's going to be more or less comprehensive. But what we recognize is that one seat at the table isn't actually going to change anything. And so if we were to look at an ideal model, it would be as an equal partner, as a stakeholder with as much clout and as much power at the table as any other stakeholder. So I don't know what the future looks like in terms of how the stakeholders will be divided or how it will be set up. But if I was to say, 1/3 government, 1/3 sport, 1/3 athletes, that would be ideal.
Mr. Seppelt mentioned that there's an important role for sponsors and media as far as fighting the global anti-doping fight. And I wondered, might be my own naivete and thinking how simplistic it might be, but with the popularity of behavior clauses and sponsors with certain athletes, is that something that could be approached just from a legal perspective, saying, if I'm, a sponsor, I want a behavioral clause, and if, I'm watching, the finals of the men's 100 meters at the Olympics and the winners caught, what kind of, if you attach monetary repercussion to it, is that something that could help pull that stakeholder into it and force the IOC to take more of a stand and give WADA a little bit more power?
Probably you, Travis, I think.
Well, one, I totally agree. Sponsors and media both have a huge role and hopefully a power for good role to play within sport. The specific question about sponsor agreements with athletes, as I understood the question, I think you do see those. This was one of the big fights in the Lance Armstrong case, where he had an insurance policy that would pay him bonuses on consecutive Tour de France wins. But part of that was he had to do it in line with the rules. And so, when the evidence came out that he didn't win those in accordance with the rules, contrary to the insurance contract for his bonus payments, the company, got their money back, essentially. So I think it is something that's there. I think sponsors, from what I understand, are reluctant to do clawbacks. So going back in time and taking back money. But I think every sponsor, who have lawyers should take a look at that issue and ensure that their contracts are as strong as they can. But I think more importantly, we shouldn't pile on the athletes. I mean, I agree they should be there, but the sponsors ought to take a look at their agreements with sports federations and games organizers and hold those games organizers and those sports organizers to account. And in the event that conscious, intentional doping is done or is known about by those who organize events, that they should be held responsible, because they're the ones that are defrauding, I think, the investment that the sponsors are giving. And that's an area I have no knowledge that that's being done at all. And I think we would know if that was. The silence of sponsors over whether Armstrong's doping and U.S. Postal Service's doping or Russia state-sponsored doping, I think is very concerning, that the sponsors are just sticking their head in the sand and want to, be the benefactor of whatever performance is out there, and really don't want, as Hajo indicated, it's bad for business if doping is exposed, and they would much rather it not be exposed because it's bad for business.
But how do you see the interaction between WADA and sponsors? It's a WADA-focused panel. What's their future engagement to try and interact here? Okay, Mike's straight into that.
Yeah, well, I don't have necessarily the answer, but as you have probably noticed, the incoming president, Mr. Bunker, has proposed to create some kind of foundation where media and sponsors should chip in and in that way be part of the stakeholder group, and thereby also would apply to some responsibility when it comes to doping. How that will look in practical terms, I don't know. I don't even think Mr. Bunker knows that, and it's not easy, because what we are selling, I think most of us here in this room can agree, we are selling a way of living. We are selling clean sport, and we live for that more or less every day, most of us. But for the ordinary spectator and for the sponsor, that's probably not how they see it. And we need to find some way to get them buy into the thought that this is something important. And I think, I mean, the whole corporate social responsibility thinking I think could be a path we should try and seek. It will take time, I think, to get to that point. But I hope we can see more and more sponsors who can see the benefit in the long term by entering such kind of cooperation and also responsibility when it comes to doping. I mean, it's a little bit like the environmental movement worldwide, and it starts slow, but when somebody starts, and I hope if we could have a few major sponsors thinking in that way, it might be a trend that could help, but it's not easy.
I would just add, look, money for anti-doping globally and at the national level is a serious issue. Out of the, however, billions, almost $1 trillion that sport has in revenues flowing into it, if doping and preventing against sex abuse is our two biggest threats, as we've kind of heard at this conference, the minuscule amount of money going to stop those two biggest threats is just unacceptable. I question the model, however. I think it's perfectly acceptable for a sponsor to give money to research, let's say like the Partnership of Clean Competition, a separate organization not involved with enforcing the rules. But I think, imagine if, let's say Nike or those who followed the Lance Armstrong case closely know that Lance Armstrong and his team tried to give USADA under Terry Madden's watch, who I introduced earlier as the CEO, tried to make a significant donation to our organization well before the case was brought against him. And he did make a donation to the UCI. And you can understand from the commercialization of the rule enforcer, how that has a bad negative impact on those who are expecting the rule enforcer to be free of any conflicts of interest. So I think NBC, who pays billions of dollars, should have a integrity fee or integrity add-on to their money to buy the games. The IOC ought to take out of the $1 billion+ it has in its reserve fund and give a significant $150, $200 million to a trust, the interest of which kicks off to WADA, and WADA then uses that money for good to enforce the rules. That's a simple solution that's doable, that doesn't cause this conflict in the minds of commercializing the rule enforcer.
Mike,
and it could be done.
Sorry, Mike, you're going to respond to that, and then Yuri.
I agree with Travis. I just want to say it fits well into the discussion we had previously about the conflict of interest, the perceived conflict of interest. I mean, it's because it's not only about the sports movement that we as anti-doping organizations should be independent from when we make executive decisions. It's also sponsors. I mean, I can see them as part of a stakeholder group, but not as part of let's say, the executive part, and that goes for governments as well, by the way.
Yuri.
Yes. And my proposal approximately the same. I support my colleagues. I think the sponsorship, especially in new condition, extremely need a new regulation. And in this case, we have to think how these funds will be formed first, how they will distribute it, how will be distributed. And this is one question. Other question, when we discuss about high level, and this is provide this line inside Russia, when we discuss about sports of the high level, this is sports of international level. And in this case, but international level, impossible without anti-doping movement. And in this case, we have to form the rules how the supervisory board of these funds will work and will decide. Because now, for example, when we will see what the current condition, the foundation, for example, iNADO and all others, but we extremely need, first of all, increase our interactiveness, but we all time will be not so competitive when we will work on the current market because we are non-commercial. It's very important to understand. And in this case, this regulation have to be focused on the how form, how distribute, and especially how redistribute when we will see that medals was wrong. This is a question. And what will be rights of the board of directors or supervisory board? I don't know what will be. And what will be the principle of work? But in any case, it have to be independent board. This is one question. And other question, this is about because now this is principle for regulation because I graduated the Institute of Directors, London. And I know the British regulation. And all head of the companies responsible for some points. They have the social responsibility. And I told to all our sports authority, they told that, okay, under the political pushing, our sponsor leave Russia. No. Because they leave, because they're responsible. They have social responsibility, don't spend money, don't send money in unsocial jurisdiction. And I totally agree. And in this case, this regulation will be in focus on our anti-doping movement too. But now this is regulated by the corporate government regulation, company acts and some others. But we extremely need to regulate in these processes too, deeply inside. This is one question. And now my next proposal, if we now, sitting now here, and it's very nice, respectable community and all partners, I propose to organize, because one of the questions, this is the attractiveness of our movement. And maybe inside of this Playing the Game conference, we will organize the working group which will include different part of the participators from different direction. And we will find a decision how we will increase attractiveness of our movement, what we will propose to the sports society international and to national level. And I think it's a very serious task for us because, once again, for us impossible to compete on open market because against us, the pharmaceutical companies and all others. And in this case, we have to find a real solution. This is my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have room for about 2 to 3 more questions if anybody's burning, and if not, I'm going to throw one in. Okay, let's stand out in the front, please. Just a second. You're going to be second. I'm afraid there's one in the front before you.
I have a question, Nenad Dikic from Serbia. Who is in charge for clean athletes when system is not functioning, when NADO or if is suspended? I tried to get that, how to say, answer from Beckie in Rio, but in that moment we didn't think about clean athletes. We thought only about, how to say, doped athletes. But what about clean athletes in that situation?
Can I just draw out the question? I'm not sure we've got it. So hold on. So is it who's responsible when iNADO is suspended, did you say?
An international federation as well. I mean, you have suspended Taekwondo Federation from yesterday. Who is responsible for clean athletes in that moment?
Thank you.
This is a very difficult question about what we discussed. We extremely need new level of regulation. Same situation in Russia. It's very difficult to protect when, for example, maybe you know the cases when Maria Lasitskena go against the head of the management team of Russian Athletic Federation. We support she. I have same position, but we live in our system, yes? And we extremely need a special regulation of it, which will support and from the international athletes community and for other regulation inside this sports jurisdiction. Now, as I understand, this is an open field.
So thanks for the question, and it's one we've put a lot of thought behind because when our position was Russia pre-2016 should be banned based on the Pound Commission report and then the McLaren reports, we were deeply concerned about a blanket ban and what that might do in the event there were any truly clean elite level athletes in Russia. And this was a topic that was discussed extensively within the NATO community that ultimately put out a recommendation. And where we settled, and I think it was, for me, the right settling point, where we settled was the system, without question, has to be held accountable. The ROC, the minister's office, the lab, the anti-doping agency who were involved with that state-sponsored doping. Have to be. Promotions shouldn't occur to the individuals who are part of that system. So what then do you do to the athletes? Are they then the victims again of the decisions by those in control? And it's a tough question. Some suggested it's tough, like, sorry, you can't compete. Where we settled as a NADO leader group was we're going to have a process by which truly clean athletes can come forward. They have to sit down and be interviewed. They have to be truthful. They have to give us access to their medical records, to their testing results, and not come forward to us, but come forward to an international committee. I think you see, so that's what the NADOs wanted to happen. And I think that was a very fair going overboard to protect if there were truly clean athletes. You see that's where the IAAF landed. They suspended the Russia Athletics Federation. They gave a process by which there's a task force that reviews any individual athlete who applies to compete as a neutral, and they've given exceptions to those athletes. And while some can argue blanket ban, that's what should happen, I think to a large extent what we've seen, not only in our Postal case, not only in our Nike Oregon, Salazar, Dr. Brown case, not only in the Russia case, talking with Yuriy and Vitaly, the athletes in those coercive environments don't have the type of choice athletes in other environments have. And so we have to give them some benefit to either prove their innocence and compete, or give them the benefit of the doubt and go as low as we can in mitigating the ultimate sanction, because it's the system that's eating them up, not themselves, in certain regards. I mean, if it's individual athletes on their own, that's a totally different case and different analysis. But I think your question was aimed at those systems of coercion, and that's ultimately where we settled.
Mike? Yeah, I agree with Travis, and I think what happened in connection with Rio was a catastrophe where each federation had to find some system to, figure out whether the Russian, in this case, the Russian athletes were clean or not, and we saw all kinds of strange decisions. So if it goes in the direction as it seems now, where the Russian state will somehow be sanctioned and there will be a Russian ban, might be a Russian ban for participating in Tokyo in 2020, we need to find a system where the Russian athletes in this case could still participate, but there has to be some common denominators or some common standards for what they should reach, and I think that should be those. It's not easy to make those kind of standards, but it could be done. It has been done before to a certain extent in the pre-games task force group, where it has tried to make some common standards for the testing regime. It was by no means perfect, the system, but it could be done, and especially if the stakeholders, namely or mainly WADA, of course, but also in a close cooperation with the international federations and the NADOs, could set up a system that I think could be accepted.
Probably got a minute and a half, so it's going to have to be a quick one.
What are your thoughts on the CAS move to have an anti-doping division? Obviously putting aside the tremendous amount of conflicts of interest with the CAS and the IOC and the federations, but is it a good step forward to have a special anti-doping division within the CAS, or is this more of the same?
I'm not sure. I haven't been into the details of that proposal. I think one thing I would say is, as it is now, it's not fit for purpose. The CAS system is originally meant to deal with obviously arbitration cases in all kinds of disputes in the world of sports. Personally, I don't think it's fit for purpose for doping cases, and obviously the independence issue is obvious. They are not independent from the Olympic movement, and they should be. Whether it should be a separate part connected to CAS still somehow, or it should be something totally different, a tribunal of some kind, I don't know yet. But definitely we need to find another system.
Any further response from the panel? Okay, well, I get put in that nice limbo situation now where we've finished. I've asked you to ask a short question. I've got a very concise answer, and now I'm left with a minute or so to sing or dance or something. So
Please bear with me, and I crave your indulgence until we're ready to join the Congresswoman. I hope I'm going to say good morning, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I'm afraid, I hope you can hear me, but at the moment we can't hear you. So we'll just wait for a moment while we transfer the audio over. You can hear me because you're nodding. But I can hear you very well. That's great. Well, good morning, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We're delighted you've taken time out of your busy timetable to chat to us here at Play the Game 2019. And I understand you want to talk briefly to the Rodchenko Act for whistleblower protection and also some other powers under consideration in the prosecution of anti-doping policy. Thank you very much for joining us. The platform's yours.
I can't hear.
The platform is yours now, Congresswoman.
Thank you so very much. Let me greet all those in attending the Play the Game. I just stepped out of a meeting here in the United States Congress on a myriad of issues. Let me say hello, Jens, to all of your participants, and thank you, Travis, so very much. I really wanted to be with you, and obviously we're in session here in Washington, but I did want to comment on some of the issues that you were engaged in the way that we've looked at it here in the United States Congress, what is the Rodchenko Anti-Doping Act of 2019, something that I've worked on as a member of the Helsinki Commission. And the idea is that recognize the proliferation of illegal performance-enhancing drugs in sports damages the integrity of competition and defrauds individuals and corporate entities who participate in sporting competition. Just as an aside, I don't want to mix apples and oranges, but I can't help but celebrate Simone Biles, my constituent down in Houston, Texas, who has shown an enormous ability and proudness that we will probably be seeing in new athletes coming forward and doing magnificent and singularly unique exhibitions of their talent. We should be sure that all of those individuals are applauded but also recognized, and they cannot be recognized if they're going against an unfair system that deals with the complex inner workings of large-scale doping schemes and publicly known due to large part to brave whistleblowers. So we know that this bill came about through a Russian whistleblower, the one that I am speaking of, and we also know that it really goes to not offending the international world of sports, but to enhance rights of individuals who are engaged in sports. And I will tell you that this particular bill establishes criminal penalties for knowingly manufacturing, distributing, and using PEDs. This section applies to all major international competitions in which U.S. athletes or U.S. entities participate. So a question may be, how does it wrap in the international world? Well, it gives standing to those athletes who are U.S. citizens, and that helps to establish maybe a model on how we can work collectively internationally. It establishes a private civil right of action for doping, giving clean athletes and defrauded athlete corporations and entities the opportunity to pursue civil action against deception or deceptive competition. And we protect whistleblowers. We're dealing with a lot of whistleblowers here in the United States Congress at this time, but it protects whistleblowers from retaliation to ensure that intimidation tactics will not be tolerated against those who do the right thing and expose fraudulent schemes. Whistleblowers will have a private right of action if they perceive injuries. Let me indicate that this is very current. We just had what we call in the United States Congress a markup. That means that my bill has officially passed the House Judiciary Committee. We were very happy with that. It passed without opposition, and it is current. Let me bring to your attention an article in the New York Times dated October 14, 2019, and the New York Times reported that as suspected, Russia made thousands of changes to the drug test results of an unspecified number of its athletes, the head of the country's own anti-doping agency said this week, confirming the suspicions of global officials who are considering severe penalties against Russian sports programs. We try to give relief that can set a standard for our athletes, and hopefully it will be a thinking document, a role model for what can be done around the world. The best of all worlds would be that all of our athletes are able to compete on their given talents, their hard work, their decades of work, their coaches, their families, and to be able to show their prowess and, most importantly, carry the flag of their beloved nation. That is what international sports should be. That is the applause that they should hear. No athlete should be denied applause and recognition and a medal because some other athletes had a decided advantage because of doping. I'm committed to this. I feel passionate about it. Sports has uplifted so many in our multicultural communities, particularly African Americans. Over the decades and centuries, we've seen single African American athletes rise above the harshness of segregation. And that happens in countries around the world. We see it from the continent of Africa. We see it throughout Europe in populations that can rise up, South and Central America and beyond. And we should give them the cleanest, purest pathway to athletic success. Thank you for having me. I know you're doing great work there. I look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman. We felt your passion and your articulacy down here, but I'm hoping you'll stay with us now for just a few questions from the panel. I hope that's okay. And first up is going to be Becky Scott, a gold medal winner at the Olympics and the chair of the Athlete Committee for WADA.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today via Skype. It's not a question really, but rather just a comment of support for this progress and this initiative. I think on behalf of athletes, we have seen the inherent vulnerabilities that exist within sport when sport is asked to govern itself, in particular around anti-doping. And so we look to governments often for setting the standard and driving the frameworks that need to exist in order for sport to be fair for everyone. The WADA Athlete Committee has supported legislation across nations that have been introduced to combat doping in their countries, and we've seen the positive results of this, most recently in Austria, for example, where the authorities were given the right to investigate and take matters into their own hands. So we really support this, and thank you for your work and your efforts on this.
So it was a general vote of thanks and appreciation for all your hard work in bringing the bill forward. But I'm now going to introduce you to the Chief Executive of Rusada, Yuri Ganas. I'm going to hand the microphone over to him to make sure you can hear.
First of all, thank you very much for your great attention to this problem, because I understand we can find this global problem and that problem which we know, and in Russia too, only on that high level attention. And my question is, once again, thank you. Thank you for your great attention, and thank you for this act. And please, is it possible to describe how this act will work against that sports authority who was involved in the process of the doping cases and against the coaches and duty athletes? Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. If I heard you correctly, how would this work? Well, obviously, this is going to be part of our judicial system. This will provide criminal penalties. So we would have, as any justice system, criminal system, we would have to garner evidence, and the evidence would be secured from basically our FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are our national law enforcement. They would have the authority to seek information internationally if athletes were performing outside of the United States, and the athlete is the individual that would have the right of action. But criminal penalties can be documented by evidence, and they would be waged. against the actor, whether they were national or international. Obviously, there's a question of enforcement, but the civil rights action and the protection of the whistleblower actions, we would give the whistleblower protection if we needed them as they provided this information, or if we needed them in the U.S. courts.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm now going to invite a question or comment from Michael Ask, and Michael is the chair of the international group of NADOs called iNADO.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. First of all, I would like, on behalf of my organization, which represents 67 national anti-doping organizations in the world, including U.S. Anti-Doping Agency and the Russian Anti-Doping Agency, to commend you for the work you have done so far with this bill, which I think everyone who works on a day-to-day basis with the anti-doping issues see as a tool that could be very helpful, especially when we have those bigger doping schemes where we need to have a close cooperation between the anti-doping organizations, law enforcement, prosecutors, and other authorities. So thank you very much for that. My question is, coming from Europe, I would also have to say that there are some concerns among some countries, in some countries, that this legislation could interfere with laws and legislation in other countries, for instance in Europe or in other parts of the world. So I just want you to maybe give a short comment to how you see this. I don't know if there is a real conflict. To be honest, I haven't had the chance to go into the details of the bill, but I would like to hear your comment to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me see if Jens can summarize what that question was. We had a difficult time hearing that last question. Can I get a summary?
Sure, I'll try my very best. So there is a clearly difficult challenge to international regulatory cohesion when a law is proposed in one country, potentially to be executed in other countries. And I think the nub is there. How do you foresee this process of coordination?
Well, that is a very good question. That's why I am speaking to you. I believe that as this legislation moves through our Congress, through the Senate, and signed by the President of the United States, you're absolutely right. In the course of that, we will need to be engaged in international organizations. As I indicated to you, I'm a member of the Helsinki Commission, and we held hearings on this with international whistleblowers. So we looked at it internationally, but it was our attempt to set a standard to begin to regulate on behalf of our own athletes. We hope that there will be international discussions and there will be similar legislation that can be passed in a number of international jurisdictions. But we saw the harm that was done to our athletes performing internationally, and we also saw the harm to the Russian whistleblower that we invited to speak for us, whose name is the namesake of the bill. So we don't expect this to be an easy road. It is an important road. It is a vital road. It is a road that adults should take on behalf of young people who are performing internationally. And we stand by this legislation, but we do not close the door to engagement and comment and even critique on how we can make this attractive to others who are facing the same crisis, whose athletes did not win medals because they were unfairly competing against those who had utilized the process of doping. We all should be concerned about that for our young people, whatever nation they're in. Give them the opportunity for a medal to stand with their sovereign nation's flag. So I look forward to working with you. I look forward to working with the leadership. My door is open here in Washington, D.C. Let's find out how we can move this movement internationally.
Well, Congresswoman, anybody who knows the whistleblowing literature knows that the lives of whistleblowers go pretty tough. So it was always clear that sports authorities don't have the resources or the financial capabilities to protect those athletes for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, 20 years. This is clearly a huge challenge to achieve international regulatory harmonization. But we congratulate you on your efforts, and we thank you again for joining Play the Game 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to do this way. Thank you. Congratulations.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have about 5 minutes. I'm going to look at Jens. I don't really want to extend this unnecessarily. That seems to me a very fitting point to close, but if there is one burning question, I'll take it. In which case, can I, on behalf of Jens and the organising committee, invite you to thank this fantastic panel. Thank you very much.